Blake Lively was back in court, and at this point, it had become difficult to understand what she was still trying to prove. There had been a major hearing in federal court in Manhattan, where both sides argued over attorney fees. Blake's legal team was given about 30 minutes to present its side, and Justin Baldoni's team was given the same amount of time. What came out of that hearing was striking. Blake Lively was asking for a mini-trial, a completely separate proceeding just to determine how much money she believed she should receive in damages after the larger lawsuit had already been settled. Even after all of that, she was still seeking more. What stood out most was the judge's reaction. At one point, Judge Lyman looked at Blake's attorney, Michael Gottlieb, and essentially pointed out that his client could simply bring this to an end. Even from the bench, there seemed to be a sense of disbelief about why the matter was still continuing. Yet Blake's team kept pressing ahead as if everything were only beginning. They were talking about another round of discovery, expert witnesses, and an even longer legal process. The impression it created was that this was no longer only about principle. It seemed much more like Blake needed a win. Her attorney argued that she should be entitled to damages under California's anti-SLAPP law, specifically the Me Too law known as AB 1947. According to him, that law was triggered the moment Baldoni filed suit against her. That was a remarkable argument, especially because Blake had filed first. She initiated the original lawsuit, and then Baldoni countersued and publicly released evidence. Once that happened, people began looking at the evidence for themselves and comparing it to the narrative Blake had been presenting. The public response was not favorable to her. Yet her legal team's position was that Baldoni should be held responsible for the fallout that followed. The argument, in effect, was that he told the truth and she wanted him to pay for it. Reports noted that her attorney did not even attach a precise figure to the damages she was seeking, but based on the strategy that had defined this situation from the beginning, it was easy to imagine that the number would be enormous. It felt likely that the demand would go beyond $100 million. A figure like that would generate headlines, and headlines appeared to be a kind of currency for her at that stage. A poll asked whether people believed Blake deserved attorney fees, and the result was telling. A very large majority said no, while only a small minority said yes. That matched the shift in public opinion that had taken place around the case. But the most revealing detail was not the poll. It was the reaction of Victoria Burke, the woman who had actually written and championed the very law Blake was now trying to use. Victoria Burke posted a message on her private Instagram, and every word carried weight. She said she had never expected her bill to end up at the center of such a storm. As the architect of the bill, she stated that she strongly believed in its constitutionality, but she was unhappy to see it being weaponized as a public relations redemption tool by Blake Lively and her team. She added that she did not believe the judge should grant attorney fees in the matter. That was an extraordinary statement because it was coming from the creator of the law itself. Victoria Burke had developed that law from personal experience as a victim. She wanted to protect women who truly face retaliation for speaking up. Now she was watching Blake Lively use that same law in a way she openly described as a public relations tool. That was not a small disagreement. It cut directly into the heart of Blake's legal argument. The central claim from Blake's side had been that the law existed to protect people like her, but the person who wrote it was now making clear that this was not what she had intended. There had apparently been a time when Victoria was at least somewhat supportive of Blake's account. She gave interviews and appeared in coverage that placed Baldoni in an extremely serious category. But once the full set of facts emerged and she reviewed the actual evidence, her view changed. That shift mattered because it undermined the moral foundation Blake's team had been relying on. If the author of the law no longer believed it applied in this situation, that changed how the entire legal fight looked. While that legal battle continued, Blake's public relations machinery was still operating at full speed. She recently posted photos on Instagram of herself with Ryan Reynolds, drawing attention to his arms and pairing the post with Justin Bieber's song, Yummy. Almost immediately, media outlets picked it up. People magazine and the New York Post ran nearly identical pieces at the same time, repeating the same details, even down to the fact that the food on Ryan's plate was cookies. It was hard not to see that for what it was, a press release disguised as celebrity gossip. The word yummy did not seem accidental either. During the legal battle, a text message had surfaced in which Blake described her personality to Baldoni as spicy, playfully bold, flirty, and yummy. That message had generated intense attention and did not reflect well on her in light of the harassment allegations she was making. By using that same word in a new Instagram post, she appeared to be trying to reshape the search results. Instead of people finding the old text, she wanted them to find polished images of her and Ryan. It was a strategy of burying one story beneath another. Outside the courthouse, Some of the most revealing moments were happening as well. Elsie from LCTV on YouTube was there asking the questions that many others were avoiding. She spoke with Sigrid, Blake's public relations attorney, and asked what had changed. For so long, Blake and her team had insisted that she wanted her day in court. Sigrid herself had repeatedly said Blake was looking forward to trial. So why, after all of that, had there been a settlement? What happened? The answer did not really answer anything. It was vague and scattered, referring to the law coming to fruition and Blake being heard, but it never directly addressed the shift. Elsie pressed further, pointing out that the case now seemed to have moved away from sexual harassment justice and toward a fight over money. That was the question many people had been asking. At a certain point, the story stopped revolving around what had happened on set and started revolving around how much Blake might be able to gain financially. The timeline made that harder to ignore. Blake had already settled the main lawsuit, the one involving the actual harassment allegations. That chapter was over, yet she remained in court fighting over attorney fees and damages. That naturally raised the question of what the mission now really was. Sigrid responded by saying that Blake had future plans for advocacy, that there would be important work ahead and positive things to come. But that promise of future advocacy was striking because, since the settlement, Blake had already appeared at the Fendi show, attended the Met Gala, and remained active on Instagram. What she had not been seen doing was direct, on-the-ground work for the women she said she was fighting for. The advocacy was always described as something still ahead, never something happening in the present. That was part of what frustrated so many people. The law she was invoking, AB 1947, was genuinely important. It existed to protect people who speak up about sexual harassment and then suffer retaliation for it. It was designed for real people with real stories who need real legal protection. When a law like that gets drawn into a case that many people, including the law's own creator, view as a public relations maneuver, the damage goes beyond one celebrity dispute. It can weaken confidence in the law itself. It can make future cases harder for women with legitimate claims because the public may become more skeptical after watching how this one unfolded. Victoria Burke seemed to understand that clearly. She did not merely express discomfort. She said outright that she did not believe the judge should award attorney fees. That was a direct and serious statement from someone who had every reason to want her law to succeed in court. What she was making clear was that there was a difference between the law being upheld and Blake Lively personally benefiting from it. She was drawing a line between the law's purpose and the way it was being used here. On the other side, Justin Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, also spoke outside the courthouse, and one of his comments stood out. He said Baldoni might take on some kind of advocacy role in the future, specifically helping people who have been falsely accused. If that happens, it could be meaningful, because this case showed how immediate the damage can be when someone is publicly accused of something serious. A person's reputation can take the blow long before the full facts emerge. By the time the evidence reveals a more complicated reality, public opinion may already be fixed. According to Friedman, the experience had been emotionally difficult for Baldoni. He said that something like this shatters a person's confidence and sense of safety. Baldoni had opened himself up in ways most people never do, and that vulnerability had been deeply wounded. At the same time, Friedman said the support from people who followed the case and believed in him had genuinely helped him survive it. Looking at how the case unfolded, that felt believable. Baldoni did not come across as someone performing a role. His text messages, his emails, and the way he spoke about his children made him seem like a real person caught in something much larger than he had expected, someone forced to fight his way through it. A source close to Baldoni said he fully intended to keep making films. Whatever advocacy role he might choose to take on, filmmaking was not going away. That felt fitting because this whole saga had begun with a film. It ends with Us. And somewhere amid the press tours, power struggles, leaked text messages, and legal filings, that original context had been lost. Back in the courtroom, another detail lingered. While arguing for the mini-trial, Blake's attorney was met with a comment from Judge Lyman that seemed especially important. The judge said he was not trying to come up with something convenient for either side. He was trying to determine what the law actually meant. That, ultimately, was the real issue. What did the law truly mean? Did it cover a situation like this, where the person invoking it was also the one who initiated the legal conflict? Could it properly be applied when the very person who wrote the law was now saying she did not believe it should? Those were the questions the judge had to answer, and whatever he decided would extend far beyond Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. His ruling would help define how AB 1947 could be used in future cases. That was exactly why Victoria Burke had spoken up. This was not just about whether Blake recovered attorney fees. It was about whether a law written to protect vulnerable women would be shaped in court by a case that many believed represented the opposite of its intended purpose. Looking at the larger picture, the sequence of events was striking. Blake filed a lawsuit. Baldoni countersued. He created a website containing evidence. The public read that evidence and reacted badly to Blake. Now Blake was in court arguing that Baldoni should compensate her for the public's reaction to what had been revealed. That was the argument in its simplest form. The truth surfaced, and she wanted damages because people did not respond to it in her favor. Judge Lyman had not yet ruled on whether she would receive her mini-trial. He was still working through what the law permitted, but based on his comments in court, including his observation that Blake could simply end the matter, it did not sound as if he had fully accepted her side's interpretation. The decision remained pending, but the skepticism in the room was difficult to ignore. At the same time, Blake's public image strategy continued. From a public relations perspective, it was fascinating, even if it was also easy to read once the pattern became clear. The yummy post was not random. Nothing she was doing publicly felt random anymore. The Met Gala appearance seemed calculated. The Fendi show seemed calculated. The carefully presented couple photos with Ryan Reynolds seemed calculated as well. The image being rebuilt was specific. A fun, unbothered, happily married woman who had risen above the controversy. The problem with that image was that the controversy kept pulling her back because she was the one choosing to remain in court. She was the one pushing for the mini-trial. Her legal team was the one insisting that her damages were significant. It was difficult to reconcile those competing messages. Someone cannot project a carefree, thriving life on Instagram while simultaneously arguing in court that their reputation has been so badly harmed that they deserve millions in compensation. Those two positions do not sit comfortably together. Either life is going wonderfully and nothing has shaken you, or you have suffered such major losses that you must be made whole. Trying to claim both at once creates a contradiction, and people were noticing it. Ryan Reynolds remained another lingering element in the background. The text messages released in the case, particularly the ones that seemed to be written in Blake's voice to Baldoni, led many people to question how involved Ryan had been. Blake maintained that she wrote those messages herself, but the tone, the phrasing, and the style left many observers unconvinced. The message in which she described herself as flirty and yummy, in what seemed like an effort to charm Baldoni into accepting Ryan's script rewrites, did real damage to her position. It is difficult to maintain a victim narrative when there is documented evidence of language like that being sent directly to the person later accused. That was why the Instagram use of yummy looked so deliberate. It seemed like an attempt to bury the earlier text under a new, more favorable association. It was clever in a calculated way, but anyone who had followed the case closely was unlikely to forget. More importantly, the judge certainly would not forget, because he had the actual documents before him. The likely next step was clear. Judge Lyman would decide whether Blake received her mini-trial for damages. If he said no, that chapter would probably close, leaving her with the settlement but no additional financial reward, which would amount to a serious setback for her team's broader strategy. If he said yes, then the conflict would continue with more discovery, more expert witnesses, more headlines, and more courtroom drama. But regardless of how he ruled, something fundamental had already changed. Victoria Burke, the woman who wrote the law Blake was relying on, had publicly said she believed Blake was weaponizing it. That was not something that could simply be spun away. The statement existed now, and every future discussion of the case would have to confront it. The most important development was not merely the mini-trial request, the fight over attorney fees, or even the judge's remarks. It was that the moral basis of Blake's strategy had been challenged by the very person who created the legal foundation she was trying to stand on. Meanwhile, Baldoni appeared to be moving forward. According to Friedman, he was still processing everything, which made sense. An experience like that does not simply pass without consequences, but he was still making films, and there was the possibility that he might step into advocacy work as well. The people who had supported him throughout the ordeal clearly meant a great deal to him, and that mattered. Blake, on the other hand, would likely continue posting on Instagram. Her team would continue placing stories in the press. Her representatives would continue offering vague answers outside courthouses, and carefully packaged media narratives would continue to appear in celebrity news form. That machine did not look like it was going to stop. But inside that Manhattan courtroom, none of those tactics would make the decision. A judge was left with a question that did not have a convenient answer. In the end, no carefully timed post, no coordinated article, and no polished image campaign would determine the outcome. It would come down to what the law actually said and what it had actually been meant to do. And the woman who gave that law its purpose had already gone on record saying that Blake had gotten it wrong. That was where things stood.